Hello, and welcome to this episode of Gimme Shelter Security in Azure. Today we're going to talk about database protection, mostly around SQL databases. My name is Dwayne Natwick. I'm a Cloud Training Architect Lead at Opsagility. I'm also a Microsoft Certified Trainer and Regional Lead for that program and a Azure MVP. You can follow me on social media at the links provided on this slide. So today we're going to talk about databases, and like I said, primarily around SQL, but some of this applies to other platform service database environments that you might have within the Azure environment. We're going to talk about database authentication, database firewalls, which is a little bit different than Azure firewalls, discovery and classification, vulnerability assessments in SQL, Microsoft Defender, advanced threat protection, and database encryption. So we talked about this, I think, a little bit when we were talking about storage security, but this aligns very well also with database security because there is obviously data stored within both environments. So we talk about data sovereignty from a standpoint of where data is physically located. And it's important to take this into account when we're building our databases as well as when we're building our storage accounts. What geography and regions within the Azure in the Azure ecosystem we're putting our data, and it's important. So when we are creating databases within our environment, we need to take all of these things into account in terms of what geography and what governmental sovereignty we have in terms of requirements for where that data resides, where it traverses, and where it, who is accessing it, as well as, if we're utilizing regional pairing and backups within the databases, where those backups are maintained and what the pairing of those regions with, and are they within that same geography as well? Or are we going across any kind of international borders that might cause a sovereignty issue as well as a regulatory issue? So we need to make sure that we're taking that into account when we're designing and creating our data environment, whether that's storage accounts or databases as where that information lies, because we might get into a situation from a legal standpoint or governmental standpoint that could get us in trouble or could cause exposure of data for clients or personnel that might be outside of that geography as well. So keep that all in mind when you're building out your environment in terms of what the sovereignty is and what the requirements are for specific geographies that you are going to be working under. Databases, and SQL database in particular, has some options in terms of authentication, and mainly from an authentication standpoint, you can utilize Azure Active Directory for the service within Azure, for the platform, and to access your platform. You also then need to have a level of access then for the database as well. So not just the service, you have to have access to the database as well. So you might have a database administrator that is administering and managing the platform service of SQL database, but without having the SQL database administrator role in place, they can't work within the actual database itself. So which provides a very good segregation of duties, because you might not have the same person that DBA that's working on the SQL on the databases that needs that level of access for the actual platform and what the security parameters are and all of those things. So keep that in mind when you're building out your role-based access control for for your platform databases, of having those multiple roles in place to govern and to provide that segregation of duties and that proper protection in terms of your identity and access management. Database firewalls, a little bit different than an Azure firewall, but works very much the same. But by default, keep in mind that that turning on the SQL, the database firewall, denies all access. So you're going to have to create all of your rules from the database level rules to allow IP addresses or Azure services to access your database. So but very similar to any other type of firewall or even a network security group, you're going to have to create rules that allow or deny access. But keep in mind, it's a deny all to start. So you can very easily then build up your rules for who needs access, what IP addresses need access or what services need to access that database, keeping a level of protection then within your environment. And if you don't have that rule in place and you cannot access those databases, it's because it's still within the realm of that deny all rule. They have the capability to create and to do audits within your database and configure those audits. You can set up lifecycle management for retention of the audit data within the account and save it to a storage account and have different policies to audit on a regular basis as well, and allow those policies then to apply to across all of your databases within the SQL database platform. So it's very important here to understand and to be able to report then on your database activity and then analyze all of those results of that activity for any potential threats that might come into that environment or anomalous activity of somebody accessing your environment and things of that nature. So important to potentially to turn on, good best practice to turn on the database auditing so that you can keep track of what activity is going on. Very similar to having activity turned on in your virtual machines or your virtual network, having Network Watcher in your virtual network, having all those tools that are at your disposal within the Azure environment to monitor and manage activity. And all of that starts to get fed into then if you turn on Azure Sentinel as a SIEM or any other event management service, you can push all of those logs and that information to those tools to find if there's any threats or vulnerabilities within your environment. When we're working with data that's in databases, we generally have sensitive data within there, whether it's our company data for an HR database or client databases and things of that nature. It's important to classify information, right, and protect information around our organization. It could be our financial data. We might be feeding our sales data and our information all into a database from our front-end applications for HR, for customer, for CRMs, for our accounting accounting application. All of these things feed into databases and feed into those database tables. So what we need to do is identify what information needs to be protected within there. And one of the features within Azure SQL Database is it is built into Azure SQL Database to recognize sensitive data and discover that data and then classify that data as whether it needs to be, whether it's confidential, whether it's PII or personal health information, things of that nature, and creates those labels within that information. And then you can report that information as well. You could do data discovery and gather that information and assign it yourself or audit and make sure that it is classified properly. If there's information that might have slipped through that isn't classified, you can do that as well. Vulnerability assessments is another feature within the SQL database that you can scan and review vulnerabilities. It's very similar to security, what recommendations go with virtual machines for Security Center. This scans the actual database rather than the actual platform. So it goes a level deeper and can provide you then with certain security checks and recommendations that you might have in terms of what's failing within there. And you can set this up for periodic scans and then export those reports to report back to management. And it looks at everything from a database level as well as a server level in terms of potential security issues. So your entire platform is being looked at from the SQL environment, the platform environment, as all the way down to your database, so you can understand what might be necessary within your environment to protect, and what level risk that might be to that vulnerability might be to potential threats. That segues into advanced threat protection as well. We have the ability within the Security Center to turn on advanced threat protection for our database. It's offered to you as a trial when you turn on SQL database services. And this looks at some of the key threats when thinking about like OWASP threats and those top 10 threats to your environment. Some key ones within that OWASP top 10 are around databases, is SQL injection and having that vulnerability, brute force attacks, having data exfiltration and anomalous client logins. All of those things are looked at within advanced threat protection and can alert you on those potential threats that might be coming into play, as well as provide you with recommendations. Again, the vulnerability assessment along with the advanced threat protection can help you overall protect that SQL environment and your database. Dynamic data masking, a little bit different than data classification. This takes your sensitive data. It can do dynamic data masking to recognize things such as birthdays, email addresses, street addresses, social security numbers, credit card numbers, and those can be then masked automatically within the database to people that don't have access. So people that are just users of that database that might not be, you don't want them to be able to see somebody's credit card number and things of that nature. That dynamic data masking works with role-based access control to mask that sensitive data to those non-privileged users. Again, administrators are excluded, but you can add anybody to the group that is those non-privileged users and have those rules that are applied to the masking logic as well. But you can see here on the slide, you can see this is very similar to when you're on a shopping site and you look at your account and it shows you just the last 4 digits of your credit card number. So that is secure and it's masked for anybody that might potentially hack into your account. That's how this dynamic data masking also works within the SQL environment. There are 2 types of encryption within databases as well, and we'll talk about those here in the next couple slides. The first is transparent data encryption, and what this protects is our database, our backup, and our logs all at rest. So this is our data, our encryption at rest type capabilities within here. Unlike storage accounts, encryption isn't turned on by default within SQL database. We need to determine what type of encryption we're going to use, and then turn it on, set it up based on whether we're going to use the service managed keys within Azure, or we're going to utilize Azure Key Vault or a HSM for customer managed keys. But this is real-time level encryption and decryption throughout the environment, and as you can see here, it supports Azure SQL database. You can see it is enabled by default for Azure SQL database, but not for SQL managed instance and Azure Synapse Analytics. which was the former SQL data warehouse. So if we are using the full platform service of Azure SQL database, it is enabled by default, but it's also available for some of the other SQL database services as well that run the back end of SQL. But this provides then that page level encryption and decryption. Always encrypted is the full encryption for our data within SQL at rest as well as in transit and in use. This it's self-explanatory. If we're looking at always encrypted, we're looking at it being always encrypted in use, in transit, and at rest. So utilizing this, we have the client-side encryption and are utilizing that data and separating owners and managers, and where our data is accessed only from client applications and from servers. So we're building that all within our application to be able to then view that data in use as encrypted data. Important thing to note here is that utilizing always encrypted, we need to make sure that whatever application we have can present that encrypted data. So that's where, if you ask a question, why wouldn't I just turn this on by default and utilize this because I want my data encrypted from end to end and always stay encrypted? You might have an application that can't present that data. So it's important to understand, what the requirements are for utilizing always encrypted within your environment. You might only be able to utilize the transparent data encryption and then utilize, in transit, make sure you're utilizing SSL protocols for encryption in transit, but you might not be able to keep it encrypted in use because your application might not be able to handle that. So that's why there's two different types of encryptions within the database services within Azure. And here we can kind of look at how this is implemented and how the keys take place. We have our always encrypted wizard that what we're encrypting, what we're determining is encrypted, so you can determine specific columns within your environment and naming of data that is going to be that part of that always encrypted. So it doesn't have to be all of the data within your database that is part of that always encrypted. So it's a little bit different than like transparent data encryption, which it's working right on the database, and then how that certificate is being stored. So let's take a look at a couple of these things and how we look at that within the SQL database service. So we're in our Azure portal, and I'm going to go into my resource group that I have my database in, and I'm going to find my SQL database here, or find my SQL database server. And we can look in here, and we can see within here are different sets of settings, managing our backups and pools here, and go to my SQL databases right within here as well. I'm going to click on my SQL database, and if I go down here into my security areas, you can see here my different capabilities within here. If I go to Security Center, it's going to ask me to actually create my SQL setup. So I did not turn on when I set up my SQL database. I did not turn on the advanced threat protection. So here I can go into my server settings and turn on and configure a storage account. If I wanted to all right, so my storage account has been created, and here I can set up my different settings. If I want to be alerted, I can do all of that. But here I'm just going to click Save, and I have now enabled my Azure Defender for SQL within the environment. After a minute or so, this will be all set to go. Once I get this all turned on, and within Security Center, once I turn on vulnerability assessments within Security Center, I as you can see, as we enter our SQL database, that I did not set up the Defender for SQL within my Security Center. So I can go into Security Center, I can go in and create, set up that trial, set that up within our environment, and then I can then create my vulnerability assessments within here. So I'm not going to do that right now, but that's where we can then set up periodic vulnerability assessments in our environment. We have our advanced threat protection for our alerts. I don't have any alerts right now, which is a good thing. And we can also then set up our data discovery and classification in here. I don't have anything to configure or any data within my database right now, so this is where we would do this. Here is our transparent data encryption, and you can see, as stated, this is the SQL database platform service. So this is encrypted by default, which is actually a little bit of a change. You actually had to, a few months back, actually turn this on. It wasn't on by default necessarily in all of the SQL database services, but now if you do turn on the Azure SQL database platform service, it is on by default. But if you were to be utilizing SQL managed instance or utilizing Azure Synapse, you need to turn on this transparent data encryption. And this really is very similar to storage service encryption for a storage account. This is the data at rest type of encryption. So you can do that there as well. So those are kind of the key things to just kind of look at within the environment and to take into account when you are reviewing your security and your protection for a database. Particularly, we covered a lot around SQL, some of the same types of services, and maybe not to the degree of what they have within SQL within Microsoft, because Microsoft has a lot with SQL, but you can do a lot of the same similar features with some of the other platform services like Cosmos DB and whatnot. So that's it for this episode. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in and hopefully gain some information about some ways to protect yourself when you're running SQL database within the Azure environment. Feel free to follow me on social media and subscribe to my YouTube channel for upcoming episodes of Gimme Shelter Security in Azure, as well as previous episodes for my network series, as well as catch up on this series as well. Thank you very much, and have a great day. So that ends this episode of Gimme Shelter Security in Azure around databases. Please reach out to me, follow me on social media. The links are provided on this slide, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel to keep up to date on new episodes of this series, as well as the services, other series and episodes that I've done previously around network security, as well as this series. I think we're in around episode 9 or 10 on this series, and we have more to come. So thank you very much, and have a great day.